The dust of the Arizona Trail clung to Olivia Zephyr's skirts as she walked away from Wilcox with nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart full of shattered dreams. The setting sun cast long shadows across the desert landscape, turning the sky into a canvas of crimson and gold that mocked her bleak circumstances. She had no food, no water, no place to sleep, and no destination in mind, only the burning desire to leave behind the town that had taken everything from her. She'd been walking for hours, her throat parched and her feet aching within her worn boots. The spring of 1885 had been uncharacteristically hot, even for Arizona territory, and the relentless sun had sapped what little strength she had left. Olivia stumbled slightly, steadying herself against a large boulder beside the trail. Her vision blurred momentarily, and she realized she wouldn't make it much farther without water. The sound of hoofbeats broke through her hazy thoughts. She turned to see a rider approaching from the direction of town, his silhouette sharp against the fiery backdrop of the sunset. Instinctively, she straightened her posture, unwilling to appear as desperate as she felt. Pride was all she had left, and she clung to it fiercely. The rider slowed his horse as he approached. He was tall in the saddle, with broad shoulders and a weathered Stetson pulled low over his eyes. His duster was coated with the same fine layer of dust that covered everything in this part of the country. "Madam," he called out, his voice deep and tinged with concern. "You planning to walk all the way to Tucson? That's 30 miles at least." Olivia lifted her chin. "I'll get where I'm going, sir. Please don't trouble yourself on my account." The cowboy studied her for a long moment. He had keen eyes that seemed to take in everything about her situation without judgment, from her once fine dress, now soiled from the road, to the determined set of her jaw that couldn't quite hide her exhaustion. "At least take my canteen," he said, holding out a worn leather water vessel. "Desert's no place to be without water." She hesitated, eyeing both the canteen and its owner warily. She'd learned the hard way that men's offers of help often came with expectations. "I don't accept charity," she said firmly. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Not charity, madam. Just common sense. No one survives these parts without water. You can return it next time you're passing through." The absurdity of his words, as if she'd ever return to the place that had crushed her dreams, almost made her laugh. Instead, she found herself reaching for the canteen, her thirst overriding her pride. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Henry Hayes. Most folks call me Hank." He tipped his hat. "And you would be Olivia Zephyr." She uncorked the canteen and took a careful sip, fighting the urge to gulp down the precious water. Henry Hayes watched her with those observant eyes. "Miss Zephyr, I don't mean to pry, but a woman alone on this road at dusk is asking for trouble. Bandits, wild animals, the elements, they don't discriminate. I'm aware of the dangers, Mr. Hayes." She recorked the canteen, intending to hand it back. He waved it off. "Keep it for now. Where are you headed away from here?" His expression remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes, understanding, perhaps. "That's not much of a destination. It's all I have at the moment." Henry Hayes shifted in his saddle, looking back toward town and then at the darkening sky. He seemed to be wrestling with a decision. "I've got a small ranch about 5 miles west of here," he said finally. "Nothing fancy, but there's a spare room where you could rest for the night. Continue your journey tomorrow if you're still set on it." Olivia stiffened. "I told you I don't accept, not charity," he interrupted gently. "Consider it a business arrangement. I could use help with some mending and cooking. 1 night's work for 1 night's shelter." She hesitated, weighing her limited options. Night was falling quickly, and with it would come the dangerous cold of the desert. She had no blanket, no supplies, and despite her brave words, she knew the chances of surviving a night exposed to the elements were slim. "One night," she agreed reluctantly, "and I leave at first light." Henry nodded, offering his hand to help her up. After a moment's hesitation, she took it, surprised by the calloused warmth of his grip as he swung her up behind him on the horse. "Hold on," he instructed, and she cautiously placed her hands at his waist, maintaining as much distance between them as the saddle would allow. As they rode away from the trail, Olivia wondered if she was making another in a long line of mistakes. But the rhythmic sound of the horse's hooves against the hard-packed earth had a soothing quality, and despite her best efforts to remain alert, she found herself leaning slightly against the cowboy's back, her exhaustion finally catching up with her. Henry felt the subtle change in her posture and slowed the horse to a gentler pace. "Not much farther now, Miss Zephyr, just over that rise." Olivia straightened immediately. "I'm fine, Mr. Hayes. Please don't concern yourself." He didn't respond, but she thought she detected a slight smile in his profile. True to his word, they crested a small hill to reveal a modest ranch nestled in a protected valley. A simple but well-maintained house stood near a barn and corral, with several outbuildings scattered nearby. A small stream cut through the property, explaining how he managed to sustain a ranch in this arid landscape. As they approached, a dog came bounding out to greet them, barking enthusiastically. "That's Rusty," Henry said. "Don't worry, his bark is worse than his bite." He dismounted with the fluid grace of a man who'd spent most of his life in the saddle, then reached up to help her down. This time, Olivia accepted his assistance without hesitation, her legs unsteady after the long ride. "Welcome to the Double H," he said, gesturing to the ranch around them. "It's not much, but it's home." Olivia took in the surroundings. Despite its modest size, the place had a well-cared-for appearance that spoke of its owner's character. The corral held several horses, and a small herd of cattle could be seen grazing on a nearby hillside. "You manage this place alone?" she asked, following him toward the house. "Mostly. I hire hands during roundup and branding, but day to day, it's just me and Rusty." He patted the dog's head affectionately. Inside, the house was simple but surprisingly comfortable. A large stone fireplace dominated the main room, with a well-worn sofa and armchair arranged before it. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes that appeared well-read. The kitchen was small but tidy, with a cast-iron stove and a sturdy wooden table. "The spare room's through there," Henry said, pointing to a doorway off the main room. "It's not fancy, but the bed's clean. I'll start dinner while you get settled." Olivia stood awkwardly in the center of the room. "I thought I was to cook as payment for my lodging." "You look dead on your feet, Miss Zephyr. Get some rest. There'll be plenty for you to do tomorrow if you're still determined to earn your keep." His kindness disarmed her. In Wilcox, kindness had always come with strings attached. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes," she said softly, then retreated to the spare room before he could see the tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. The room was small but neat, with a narrow bed covered in a colorful quilt, a washstand with a porcelain basin, and a small chest of drawers. A window looked out over the valley, now bathed in the last purple light of dusk. Olivia set down her meager belongings, just a small reticule containing a handkerchief, a few hairpins, and the worthless deed that had been her undoing. She poured water from a pitcher into the basin and washed her face and hands, wincing at the sight of her reflection in the small mirror. Her auburn hair had come loose from its pins, and her green eyes were shadowed with exhaustion and defeat. How had she come to this? 6 months ago, she'd been the respectable daughter of a Boston merchant, with prospects and a future. Now she was accepting the charity, no matter what he called it, of a stranger in the Arizona desert. The sound of movement in the kitchen drew her from her thoughts. Whatever Henry Hayes's motivations, he had offered her shelter when she desperately needed it. She would repay his kindness, then continue on her way. She couldn't afford to stay in one place for long, not with Thomas Blackwood likely searching for her. With that thought turning her blood cold, Olivia splashed more water on her face and straightened her dress as best she could. She would earn her keep, accept this one night of safety, and be gone before her presence could bring trouble to this quiet ranch. When she emerged from the room, Henry was at the stove, stirring something that smelled surprisingly good. He'd removed his hat and duster, revealing dark hair with a slight wave to it and a lean, muscular build that spoke of a life of physical labor. "Feel better?" he asked without turning. "Yes, thank you." She moved toward the stove. "Please let me help." He stepped aside, allowing her access to the pot of stew he'd been tending. "I'm not much of a cook, but I managed not to starve." The stew was simple beef, potatoes, and a few vegetables, but it was savory and filling. As Olivia tasted it, she realized how hungry she was. "It's very good," she said honestly. "Where did you learn to cook?" "Necessity," he replied with a slight smile. "When you live alone, you either learn or go hungry." While they ate at the small kitchen table, Henry didn't press her with questions about why she'd been leaving Wilcox on foot with nothing but the clothes on her back. Instead, he spoke of his ranch, the drought they'd been facing, and his hopes for the coming season. "The cattle market's been tough lately," he explained, "but I've got a contract with the Army at Fort Huachuca that should see me through." Olivia listened, grateful for conversation that required little from her. When they finished eating, she insisted on washing the dishes, and he didn't object. As she worked, Henry built a fire in the fireplace, the crackling flames bringing warmth to the room as night fully descended. Outside, the desert came alive with sounds: coyotes calling in the distance, the soft hooting of an owl, the rustling of the wind through the mesquite. "It's peaceful here," Olivia said, almost to herself as she dried the last plate. Henry looked up from the fire. "That's why I chose it. After the war, I needed quiet." She studied him with new interest. "You fought in the war," he nodded, his expression becoming distant. "Cavalry. Saw action at Gettysburg and Cold Harbor." The mention of the war explained much about him: his self-sufficiency, his quiet manner, the shadows that sometimes crossed his face. "My father was a supplier for the Union Army," she offered. He never spoke of what he saw when he visited the front, but he came back changed each time. Henry's gaze met hers, and for a moment, there was a connection and understanding between them that needed no words. The moment was broken by Rusty, who pushed his nose against Henry's hand, seeking attention. "Someone's feeling neglected," Henry said with a small smile, scratching behind the dog's ears. Olivia yawned suddenly, unable to stifle it behind her hand. "You should get some rest," Henry said, rising from his chair. "Morning comes early around here." She nodded, fatigue washing over her in waves. "Good night, Mr. Hayes, and thank you again." "Henry," he said, "if we're going to be sharing a roof, even for one night, you might as well use my name." "Henry," she repeated softly. "Then I'm Olivia," he nodded once. "Good night, Olivia, sleep well." As she settled into the narrow bed in the spare room, Olivia listened to the sounds of Henry moving around the house, banking the fire, checking doors. There was something comforting about his presence, something that made her feel safer than she had in months. But safety was an illusion, she reminded herself. Tomorrow she would leave, continuing on to where? She still didn't know. Away from Wilcox, away from Thomas Blackwood and his lies, away from the humiliation of having lost everything. With those troubling thoughts, she drifted into an exhausted sleep, dreaming of horses and dust and a pair of kind eyes beneath the brim of a weathered Stetson. Olivia woke with the first light of dawn, momentarily disoriented by unfamiliar surroundings. The events of the previous day came flooding back her desperate flight from Wilcox. The encounter with Henry Hayes, the unexpected sanctuary of his ranch. She rose quickly and donned her wrinkled dress, smoothing it as best she could. After washing her face and rebraiding her hair, she felt marginally more prepared to face the day and her inevitable departure. The aroma of coffee and frying bacon greeted her as she entered the main room. Henry stood at the stove, already dressed for the day in a clean shirt and denim trousers. "Morning," he said, glancing up from the skillet. "Thought you might want some breakfast before you head out." "Thank you." She hesitated, then moved to the stove. "I can finish that if you have chores to attend to." He shook his head. "Already fed the horses and let the chickens out. Breakfast is about done anyway." They ate in comfortable silence, the early morning light streaming through the windows. Olivia found herself studying her host when he wasn't looking. In daylight, she could see that Henry Hayes was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30 or 32, with lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting into the sun and a life lived outdoors. His features were strong and regular, with a straight nose and a firm jaw shadowed by dark stubble. "So," Henry said finally, setting down his coffee cup. "You still planning to leave today?" Olivia hesitated. The prospect of returning to the road with no destination was daunting, but staying would only delay the inevitable. "Yes," she said firmly. "But I insist on working for my keep first, as we agreed." Henry studied her for a moment, then nodded. "There's mending in the trunk by the window that I've been putting off, and if you're of a mind, I wouldn't say no to some biscuits to go with the leftover stew for dinner." "I can do that." She stood and began clearing the table, relieved to have concrete tasks to focus on. As she worked through the morning, mending shirts and trousers with neat, even stitches, Olivia found herself watching Henry through the window as he worked around the ranch. He moved with an economy of motion, handling the horses with gentle confidence and completing each task with methodical efficiency. By midday, she had finished the mending and was kneading dough for biscuits when Henry came in, bringing the scent of sun and dust with him. "Making good progress," he commented, washing his hands at the sink. "I've nearly finished," she replied, cutting the dough into rounds. "These will bake quickly." Henry leaned against the counter, watching her work. "You're welcome to stay another night if you'd like. The stage doesn't come through until tomorrow, and it's a long walk to the next town." Olivia's hands stilled. "I thought you said you needed help for just one night." "I did." He met her gaze directly. "But I'm offering a second night because I don't like the thought of you walking alone with nowhere to go." His forthright concern caught her off guard. She'd grown accustomed to men who wanted something from her, her father's money, her connections, her body. Henry Hayes seemed to want nothing except to ensure her safety. "Why do you care what happens to me?" she asked bluntly. "You don't know anything about me or why I was leaving Wilcox." "I know enough," he said simply. "I know you're in trouble and I know you're afraid." That's reason enough to offer help. Olivia felt her carefully constructed defenses begin to crack. "You shouldn't get involved in my problems, Henry. It could bring trouble to your door." "I'm no stranger to trouble." There was a quiet strength in his voice that spoke of experiences he didn't share. "Whatever you're running from, 2 days' distance is better than one." She couldn't argue with his logic, and the thought of another night of safety before facing the unknown was tempting. "All right, one more night." Henry nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Good. Now about those biscuits." The second day fell into a rhythm similar to the first. Olivia cooked and cleaned while Henry tended to the ranch, but she also found time to explore her temporary sanctuary. The barn housed 4 horses, Henry's bay gelding, a sturdy work horse, and 2 mares. Behind the house was a small vegetable garden that showed signs of care despite the challenging climate. In a shed near the barn, she discovered evidence of another side to her host: woodworking tools and several pieces of furniture in various stages of completion. A rocking chair, beautifully crafted with intricate carvings along the arms, sat in one corner, nearly finished. "My winter occupation," Henry explained when he found her examining the chair, "keeps my hands busy when the weather's too bad for outside work." "It's beautiful," Olivia said genuinely. "You're very skilled." A hint of color touched his cheekbones. "My father was a carpenter before he took up ranching. He taught me the basics." That evening they shared another simple meal, but the conversation flowed more easily than before. Olivia found herself telling Henry about growing up in Boston, her father's merchant business, and her love of literature, carefully avoiding any mention of recent events or why she'd come west. Henry spoke of his own upbringing in Pennsylvania, his service in the war, and his decision to start fresh in Arizona Territory. "I came out with the Army initially," he explained. "Spent 3 years at Fort Bowie before my discharge. By then, I'd fallen in love with this country despite its harshness. Or perhaps because of it," Olivia suggested. "There's an honest quality to the desert. It makes no pretenses about its dangers." Henry looked at her with newfound appreciation. "That's exactly it. You always know where you stand with the desert. It's people that are harder to read." Their eyes met across the table, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits who understood the value of directness in a world of deception. The moment was interrupted by a knock at the door. Henry frowned, rising from his chair. "I'm not expecting anyone." He moved to a shelf near the door and took down a Winchester rifle before cautiously approaching the entrance. "Who's there?" "Deputy Marshal Wilson, Mr. Hayes." "Sorry to disturb you so late." Henry glanced at Olivia, whose face had gone pale. He positioned himself to block her from view before opening the door. A weary-looking man in a dusty jacket stood on the porch, the silver star of a U.S. Marshal's badge pinned to his chest. "Evening, Hayes. Don't mean to intrude, but I'm tracking a fugitive who might have come this way." "Haven't seen any strangers," Henry replied evenly. "What's the nature of the crime?" "Theft and fraud, primarily, though there's talk of worse." The marshal handed Henry a wanted poster. "Thomas Blackwood. Conman who's been working his way through the territory, swindling folks out of their savings with fake mining investments." Olivia let out a small, involuntary sound of surprise. Henry kept his expression neutral. "Can't say I've encountered him," he said, returning the poster. "But I'll keep an eye out," the marshal nodded. "Appreciate it. He was last seen in Wilcox but might be heading south. Oh, and he may have a woman with him, an accomplice. Red-headed woman, goes by Olivia Zephyr." Henry's posture remained relaxed, but Olivia could see the tension in his shoulders. "I'll certainly let you know if I see either of them." "Much obliged." The marshal tipped his hat. "Good night, then." Henry closed the door, remaining still until the sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance. Then he turned to Olivia, who sat frozen at the table. "I think," he said quietly, "you'd better tell me what's going on." Olivia's hands trembled as she clasped them tightly in her lap. "I'm not a criminal." "I gathered that much." Henry returned to the table but didn't sit. "But you are running from Thomas Blackwood. Who is he to you?" She took a deep breath. "He was my fiancé, or so I thought." Henry's expression softened. He set the rifle aside and took his seat across from her. "Start from the beginning," and so she did. She told him how she'd met Thomas Blackwood in Boston. where he'd presented himself as a successful investor in Western mining operations. How after her father's death, leaving her with modest means but no family, Thomas had proposed marriage and painted glorious pictures of their future in the booming West. He convinced me to liquidate my inheritance and invest it in what he claimed was a sure opportunity, a silver mine near Wilcox, she explained, her voice bitter. I was so naive, so eager to believe in a future with him that I never questioned why the deed was only in his name or why we needed to travel separately. He sent you ahead, Henry guessed. Olivia nodded. I arrived in Wilcox 3 months ago. Thomas was supposed to follow 2 weeks later, but instead sent a letter saying he was delayed by business. For 2 months, I waited, living off the small amount of money he'd allowed me to keep for expenses. Then yesterday, I learned the truth. Her voice caught. The mine doesn't exist. The deed is worthless, and Thomas Blackwood isn't even his real name. He's disappeared with my entire inheritance, nearly $15,000. Henry let out a low whistle. A substantial sum. My entire future, she said softly. When I went to the sheriff, I discovered I wasn't Thomas's first victim. But instead of helping me, the sheriff seemed to think I was involved in the scheme. He said he'd be looking into my story and told me not to leave town. I knew what would happen next. I'd be arrested as an accomplice while Thomas got away clean. So you ran. I had to, but I had nowhere to go, no money, nothing but the clothes I was wearing. She looked up at him, her eyes filling with tears she refused to shed. Now you know why I can't stay. If they find me here, you'll be implicated in harboring a fugitive. Henry was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he rose and went to the window, looking out into the darkness. The marshal's looking for Thomas Blackwood, he said finally. Not for you specifically. And he's already checked here and moved on. For now, Olivia countered. But if Thomas is caught and tells them I'm an accomplice to protect himself, then we'll deal with that if it happens. Henry turned to face her. In the meantime, you need a safe place to stay while you figure out your next steps. Hope flared briefly in Olivia's chest before she tamped it down. I can't impose on you any longer. You've already been too kind. It's not imposition if I'm offering. He returned to the table. I could use help around the ranch, especially with Roundup coming. You'd have room and board, plus a small wage that you could save toward whatever future you decide on. Olivia stared at him, searching for the hidden motive in his offer. Why would you do this for a stranger? A stranger who might bring trouble at that. Henry's eyes held hers steadily. Because 20 years ago, when my father died and left my mother with 3 children and a failing farm, a neighbor took us in until she could get back on her feet. He didn't have to, but he did. Sometimes that's reason enough. The simple honesty in his words broke through the last of Olivia's defenses. A tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. I don't know what to say. Say you'll stay until you've got a better plan than walking into the desert. He smiled slightly. Besides, Rusty would miss you. At the sound of his name, the dog raised his head from his spot by the fire, tail thumping against the floor. Despite everything, Olivia found herself smiling through her tears. Well, I wouldn't want to disappoint Rusty. Henry nodded, as if the matter were settled. Good. Now, I think we could both use some rest. Tomorrow will be soon enough to work out the details. As Olivia lay in bed that night, listening to the distant howl of coyotes, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Henry Hayes might be a stranger, but he'd shown her more kindness in 2 days than Thomas had in their entire courtship. She still didn't know what her future held, but for the first time since discovering Thomas's betrayal, she felt she might have a chance to rebuild her life. And that was worth far more than the inheritance she'd lost. The next morning dawned clear and cool, with a crispness to the air that hinted at the approaching fall. Olivia rose early, determined to prove her worth if she was truly going to stay at the Double H Ranch. She found the kitchen empty but a fire already lit in the stove. Through the window, she could see Henry in the corral, working with one of the horses. Rusty lay nearby, watching his master with devoted attention. By the time Henry came in, Olivia had coffee brewing and breakfast well underway: eggs, bacon, and johnnycakes made from cornmeal she'd found in the pantry. "You didn't have to do all this," Henry said, washing up at the sink. "If I'm staying, I'll earn my keep," she replied firmly. "I won't be a burden. Never thought you would be." He sat at the table, accepting the cup of coffee she offered. "I've been thinking about your situation." "Oh." Olivia tried to keep her voice casual as she turned the bacon in the skillet. "The marshal's looking for Thomas Blackwood and possibly an accomplice named Olivia Zephyr," Henry said thoughtfully. "But he's never seen you, has he?" She shook her head. "No, I only spoke to the sheriff in Wilcox, and that was yesterday. Then, as far as anyone around here knows, you're—" He paused, considering. "My widowed cousin from back east, come to help out for a while." Olivia turned to face him. "You're suggesting I use a false identity?" "I'm suggesting you use a different name until we can clear yours," he clarified. "Once Blackwood is caught, you can provide evidence that you were his victim, not his accomplice." It was a practical solution, if not entirely honest. But after everything Thomas had done, Olivia couldn't bring herself to worry overmuch about a temporary deception meant to protect herself. "What name would I use?" "Your choice," Henry said. "Though keeping your first name might be simpler, less chance of not responding when someone addresses you." Olivia considered this as she served the food. "Olivia Hayes, then. As your cousin." "Cousin-in-law," Henry amended. "My late cousin Edward's widow. That would explain why we have different coloring and features." The ease with which he constructed this fiction made Olivia wonder if Henry Hayes had secrets of his own, but she pushed the thought aside. Whatever his past, he was offering her safety when she desperately needed it. "Olivia Hayes it is, then," she agreed. "Newly widowed and starting fresh." Henry's eyes met hers across the table. "Sometimes starting fresh is the only way forward." Something in his tone suggested he spoke from experience, but Olivia didn't press. They each had their reasons for being in this remote corner of Arizona territory, and they each had the right to reveal their pasts in their own time, if at all. The days that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Olivia took over the cooking and household tasks, freeing Henry to focus on the ranch. She found she enjoyed the physical work after months of idle waiting in Wilcox. There was satisfaction in seeing immediate results: a clean house, a good meal, mended clothes. Henry was true to his word about paying her a small wage, which she carefully saved. She had no immediate plans for the money, but having it gave her a sense of security she hadn't felt since her father's death. As September gave way to October, bringing cooler temperatures and occasional rain to the thirsty land, Henry began preparations for the fall roundup. Additional hands would be needed for the work, which meant Olivia's presence would have to be explained. "We'll keep to our story," Henry assured her as they discussed it one evening. "You're my widowed cousin-in-law, staying on to help while you decide what to do next. The hands won't question it. Most cowboys don't pry into personal matters. And if they do," Olivia couldn't help but worry. "Then I'll handle it." His confidence was reassuring. "Most of these men have worked for me before. They're good men who mind their own business." The first of the hands arrived 2 days later, a weathered older cowboy named Silas who had ridden with Henry for years. He accepted the introduction to Mrs. Hayes with nothing more than a polite nod and a "Madam," before turning his attention to the condition of the herd and the work ahead. 3 more cowboys joined them over the next few days. Brothers Jack and Samuel Turner, who couldn't have been more than 25, and a quiet half-Mexican man called Manuel who handled horses with an almost magical touch. True to Henry's prediction, none questioned Olivia's presence beyond polite interest. To them, she was simply the boss's relation who cooked excellent meals and kept to herself. The roundup was hard work for everyone. Olivia rose before dawn each day to prepare breakfast for the men and pack provisions for their midday meal. The days were long, with the cowboys returning after dark, exhausted and hungry. She made sure hot food was waiting and plenty of coffee to wash it down. Despite the demanding schedule, Olivia found herself thriving. There was purpose in her days and a growing sense of belonging that she'd never experienced before, not in her father's Boston home, and certainly not during her anxious wait in Wilcox. She also found herself watching Henry more than she should. There was something compelling about seeing him in his element, directing the roundup with quiet authority. The men respected him not because he demanded it, but because he earned it working alongside them, never asking more of them than he asked of himself. In the evenings, after the hands had retired to the bunkhouse, Olivia and Henry would often sit by the fire for a while, sometimes talking, sometimes simply enjoying the comfortable silence between them. It was during these quiet moments that Olivia began to realize her feelings for Henry were deepening into something more than gratitude or friendship. The realization frightened her. She'd believed herself in love with Thomas, only to discover he'd been using her all along. How could she trust her judgment now? And even if her feelings were genuine, Henry had given no indication that he saw her as anything more than someone in need of help. One evening, about 2 weeks into the roundup, Olivia was kneading dough for the next morning's biscuits when Henry came in earlier than usual. "Everything all right?" she asked, noting his troubled expression. "Sila's just rode in from town with news," he said, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "They've arrested Thomas Blackwood in Tucson." Olivia's hands stilled in the dough. "They caught him," Henry nodded. "Apparently he tried the same scheme there that he pulled in Wilcox, only this time his mark got suspicious and alerted the authorities before handing over any money." A complex mix of emotions washed over Olivia: relief that Thomas would face justice, anxiety about her own legal situation, and lingering anger at his betrayal. "Did Silas mention anything about me?" she asked cautiously. "No, but we should assume the marshal is still looking." Henry's expression was grave. "Blackwood will do whatever he can to reduce his own sentence, including implicating you." "What should I do?" Henry considered for a moment. "Nothing, for now. You're safe here, and the roundup gives us a perfect excuse to keep to ourselves for a while longer. By the time it's done, we'll have a clearer picture of the situation." His calm practicality steadied her. "You're right. There's no point in worrying until we know more." Henry watched her resume her work, her capable hands returning to the dough with renewed purpose. "You've come a long way from the woman I found walking out of Wilcox with nothing." She looked up, meeting his gaze. "Thanks to you." "No," he said quietly. "You had the courage to leave a bad situation and the strength to rebuild. All I did was offer a canteen and a spare room." "You offered far more than that, Henry Hayes." Olivia's voice was soft but certain. "You offered trust when you had no reason to trust me, and respect when I'd forgotten how to respect myself." Something shifted in Henry's expression, a softening around his eyes, a slight parting of his lips as if he wanted to say more. But before he could speak, the door opened and Silas entered, bringing with him the sense of dust and horses. "Evening, Mrs. Hayes," the older cowboy said, removing his hat. "Something sure smells good in here." The moment between them passed, but Olivia felt its impact lingering in the charged silence that followed her throughout the evening. That night, as she lay in bed listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch settling for the night, she wondered what Henry might have said if they hadn't been interrupted, and whether she was ready to hear it. The next week passed in a blur of activity as the roundup reached its most intense phase. The cattle were gathered, sorted, and the calves branded with the double H mark. Buyers were due to arrive soon to inspect the herd before the drive to the railhead in Benson. Olivia had little time to dwell on her confused feelings for Henry or her uncertain legal status. From dawn until well after dark, she was busy feeding hungry cowboys, tending to minor injuries, and keeping the household running smoothly. It was during this busy time that an unexpected visitor arrived at the ranch. Olivia was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard the sound of an approaching buggy. Peering around the corner, she saw a well-dressed woman in her 50s bring a smart-looking rig to a halt in front of the house. Henry was out with the herd and the hands were scattered across the range. For a moment, Olivia considered retreating inside, but curiosity got the better of her. "Hello," she called, approaching the buggy. "May I help you?" The woman regarded her with open surprise. "Well now, I didn't expect to find a young woman at the Double H." Her tone was pleasant but assessing. "I'm Margaret Thornton. My husband owns the bank in Wilcox." Olivia's heart raced, but she kept her expression neutral. "Olivia Hayes. I'm Henry's cousin-in-law." "I wasn't aware Henry had family in the area," Mrs. Thornton said, accepting Olivia's help down from the buggy. "I'm not from the area," Olivia explained, sticking to their agreed-upon story. "I came from Pennsylvania after my husband passed away. Henry kindly offered me a place to stay while I decide what to do next." Mrs. Thornton's expression softened. "I'm sorry for your loss, my dear. It's good of Henry to take you in. He's always been a gentleman, even if he does keep to himself more than is healthy." She glanced around the ranch yard with approval. "The place looks better than when I was last here. A woman's touch makes all the difference." "You've visited before?" Olivia asked, leading the way to the house. "Oh yes. My husband holds the mortgage on the Double H, though Henry's never missed a payment. I'll give him that. I stop by occasionally with business papers when Walter can't make the trip himself." Inside, Olivia offered Mrs. Thornton coffee and the apple cake she'd baked that morning. The older woman accepted both with enthusiasm. "This is delicious," she said, sampling the cake. "You're quite the cook, Mrs. Hayes. Thank you, and please call me Olivia." Mrs. Thornton smiled. "Then you must call me Margaret. There's far too little female company in these parts to stand on ceremony." As they chatted, Olivia found herself warming to the banker's wife. Margaret Thornton was forthright and intelligent, with a genuine interest in those around her that went beyond mere gossip. "How long have you been in Wilcox?" Olivia asked, careful to show only polite interest. "Nearly 20 years now. Walter came out to establish the bank when the town was just a cluster of buildings around the stage stop." Margaret sipped her coffee. "We've seen it grow into quite a respectable community, though we still have our share of unsavory characters passing through." "I imagine that's true of most frontier towns," Olivia said neutrally. Margaret nodded. "Just last month we had quite the scandal. A confidence man posing as a mining investor swindled several local businessmen. When he was finally caught in Tucson, it turned out he'd done the same thing in 3 other territories." Olivia's hand trembled slightly as she refilled Margaret's coffee cup. "How terrible, indeed. And the worst part is, he had an accomplice, a young woman who played the role of his fiancée to help gain people's trust." Margaret leaned forward. "They say she disappeared with half the money while he stayed behind to collect the rest. Can you imagine such deceit?" Before Olivia could respond, the door opened and Henry entered, his expression changing from surprise to concern when he saw their visitor. "Mrs. Thornton," he said, removing his hat. "This is unexpected." "Henry, dear, I was just getting acquainted with your cousin-in-law." Margaret's smile was warm, but her eyes were sharp. "She's been telling me how she came to stay with you after her husband's passing." Henry's gaze flicked to Olivia, a silent communication passing between them. "Yes, Olivia's been a great help during Roundup. I can see that. The place looks wonderful, and this apple cake is divine." Margaret set down her cup. "But I'm being terribly rude, showing up unannounced. I actually came to bring the papers for your loan renewal. Walter would have come himself, but his gout is acting up again." While Henry reviewed and signed the documents Margaret had brought, Olivia excused herself to prepare more coffee. In the kitchen, she leaned against the counter, taking deep breaths to steady herself. Margaret's words about Thomas's accomplice confirmed her worst fears. She was still considered a criminal, and if her true identity were discovered, she would face arrest and possible imprisonment. When she returned to the main room, Margaret was preparing to leave. "I should get back before dark. The roads can be treacherous after sunset." "It was lovely meeting you, Margaret," Olivia said, surprised to find she meant it despite her anxiety. "I hope you'll visit again." "I certainly shall, and you must come to town someday soon. We have a small literary society that meets on Thursday afternoons. I think you'd enjoy it." Margaret took Olivia's hands in hers. "It's not easy being a widow in these parts. If you ever need anything, please don't hesitate to call on me." After Margaret's departure, Henry and Olivia stood in silence for a long moment. Finally, Henry spoke. "Did she suspect anything?" "I don't think so," Olivia said. "But she mentioned Thomas and his accomplice. They believe I ran off with half the money." Henry's jaw tightened. "That doesn't surprise me. Blackwood would say anything to shift blame." "What am I going to do, Henry?" The fear she'd been suppressing broke through. "I can't hide forever, but if I come forward now, who would believe me? It would be Thomas's word against mine, and he's obviously convinced everyone I was part of his scheme." Henry crossed the room to her, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. "We'll figure it out, Olivia. I promise you that." The certainty in his voice and the solid warmth of his hands steadied her. She looked up into his face, so close to hers, and saw determination, and something else, something that made her breath catch in her throat. For a heartbeat, she thought he might kiss her. Instead, he stepped back, his hands falling away. "I should get back to the herd. The buyers will be here tomorrow, and we need to have everything ready." Olivia nodded, ignoring the pang of disappointment. "Of course. I'll have dinner ready when you return." As Henry left, Olivia tried to focus on practical matters: dinner preparations, tomorrow's baking, the mending that still needed attention. But her mind kept returning to the moment when Henry's hands had rested on her shoulders, and his eyes had held hers with an intensity that suggested his feelings might match her own. Or was she simply seeing what she wanted to see? After Thomas's deception, could she trust her own judgment when it came to men's intentions? These questions followed her through the evening and into the next day, when the cattle buyers arrived from Tucson. Olivia kept to the house, preparing a substantial midday meal for Henry and his guests while they conducted their business. She was just removing a batch of biscuits from the oven when the front door opened, and Henry entered with two well-dressed men. "Gentlemen, this is my cousin-in-law, Mrs. Olivia Hayes," Henry said smoothly. "Olivia, Mr. Garrett and Mr. Finch from the Tucson Cattle Company." Olivia wiped her hands on her apron and greeted the visitors with what she hoped was a calm smile. "Welcome to the Double H. Dinner will be ready shortly. Mrs. Hayes, your cousin speaks very highly of your cooking," Mr. Garrett said, a portly man with friendly eyes. "We've been looking forward to it all morning." The meal went smoothly, with conversation focused on cattle prices and shipping arrangements. Olivia was just serving apple pie when Mr. Finch, the younger and more observant of the two buyers, turned the discussion in an unexpected direction. "I understand there was quite the excitement in Tucson recently," he said, accepting a slice of pie. "A confidence man arrested for swindling folks up and down the territory." Olivia nearly dropped the serving knife but caught herself. She felt Henry's eyes on her as she carefully continued serving. "Yes, Thomas Blackwood," Mr. Garrett said, shaking his head. "Nasty business." Several prominent citizens lost substantial sums. "They say he had an accomplice," Mr. Finch continued, his gaze lingering on Olivia with mild curiosity. "A woman who's still at large." Henry set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. "The cattle in the south pasture should be ready for inspection after we finish here, gentlemen. I think you'll be particularly impressed with this year's calves." The change of subject was not subtle, but it was effective. Mr. Garrett immediately launched into questions about the herd's bloodlines, and the moment of danger passed. After the buyers departed, satisfied with both the meal and the cattle they'd purchased, Olivia found Henry in the barn, checking the tack before the drive to Benson. "Thank you," she said simply, "for deflecting the conversation earlier." Henry looked up from the saddle he was oiling. "Finch didn't mean anything by it. He's just naturally curious. Still, it reminded me how precarious my situation is." Olivia leaned against a post, watching him work. "Every stranger is a potential threat. Every conversation could reveal my secret." Henry set the saddle aside and straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. "The cattle drive leaves tomorrow. I'll be gone for about a week, then the hands will be paid off for the season. Once they're gone, we can talk about what comes next." The thought of Henry leaving, even temporarily, filled Olivia with unease. "I'll be fine here. Rusty's good company and I've plenty to keep me busy." "I know you can manage," he said with a slight smile. "You've proven that many times over. But I don't like leaving you alone with things unsettled." "They've been unsettled since the day you found me on the road," she reminded him. "A week more won't make much difference." But they both knew that wasn't entirely true. Every day that passed brought new complications, her growing feelings for Henry, the lingering threat of discovery, the need to eventually make a decision about her future. That evening, as Henry made final preparations for the cattle drive, Olivia packed provisions for the journey: cornbread, jerky, coffee, and the apple pies she'd baked especially for the trail. They worked in companionable silence, each aware that tomorrow would bring a temporary separation neither welcomed but both accepted as necessary. "I've left a rifle by your bed and the shotgun over the fireplace," Henry said as they finished. "I don't expect trouble, but better to be prepared," Olivia finished for him. "I know how to use them, Henry. My father taught me years ago." He looked mildly surprised. "A Boston merchant's daughter who knows how to shoot." "A Boston merchant's daughter who accompanied her father on hunting trips to Maine," she corrected with a small smile. "I'm a fair shot, though I'm out of practice." Henry nodded. "Good to know. If you need help while I'm gone, the Wilsons have a place about 3 miles east. Good people who mind their own business." "I'll be fine," she assured him again. "Just come back safely." In the morning, Olivia rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for Henry and the hands. The atmosphere was charged with the energy that precedes any significant journey, the men joking and swapping tales of previous drives as they ate. When it was time to leave, the cowboys mounted up and began moving the herd toward the east trail. Henry lingered behind, checking his saddle bags one last time. "I left a letter on my desk," he told Olivia quietly. It explains who you are and why you're here in case anything should happen to me. Don't say that, she said sharply. Nothing's going to happen. Probably not, he agreed. But cattle drives can be unpredictable. I want to make sure you're protected. The thought of losing Henry, this man who had become so important to her in such a short time, sent a chill through Olivia despite the warm morning. Just be careful. I always am. His eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary. Then, with a decisive motion, he stepped forward and kissed her briefly but firmly, his lips warm against hers before he pulled away. Olivia stood frozen, her lips tingling from the unexpected contact. I've been wanting to do that for weeks, Henry said, his voice low. I should have asked first. I apologize if don't you dare apologize, Olivia interrupted, finding her voice at last. Not unless you didn't mean it. A slow smile spread across his face. I meant it. And I'll mean it just as much when I get back. With that, he mounted his horse and rode after the herd, leaving Olivia standing in the yard with her fingers pressed to her lips and her heart beating a rapid, hopeful rhythm against her ribs. The week of Henry's absence passed more slowly than any Olivia could remember. She kept busy with household tasks, cleaning, preserving the last of the garden's produce, mending winter clothes in anticipation of the colder weather to come. Each night, she fell into bed exhausted, but still found sleep elusive as her mind replayed Henry's parting kiss and wondered what it might mean for their future. On the 5th day, as Olivia was scrubbing the kitchen floor, Rusty suddenly raised his head from his nap by the stove, ears perked toward the window. A moment later, Olivia heard it too, the sound of approaching hoofbeats, but only a single horse, not the return of the entire drive. Heart pounding, she dried her hands and moved to the window, relief washing over her at the sight of Henry dismounting in the yard. She hurried to the door, Rusty bounding ahead of her. Henry, you're back early. Is everything all right? He looked tired but smiled at the sight of her. Everything's fine. We made good time to Benson, and I left Silas in charge of bringing the hands back. Thought I'd ride ahead. The unspoken reason that he'd been as eager to return as she'd been for his arrival hung in the air between them. You must be exhausted, she said, ushering him inside. Sit down. I'll get you some coffee and heat up some stew. Henry removed his hat and dusty coat, sinking gratefully into a chair at the kitchen table. The place looks good. You've been busy. It keeps me from thinking too much, she admitted, placing a steaming cup of coffee before him. He looked up at her, his eyes serious despite his weary smile. And what have you been trying not to think about, Olivia? She busied herself with the stove, avoiding his direct gaze. Many things. My situation, the future, your kiss. Ah. There was a wealth of meaning in that single syllable. Do you regret it? Olivia turned to face him fully. Not for a moment, do you? No. Henry set down his cup. But I've been wondering if it was unfair of me. Your situation is complicated and I don't want to add to your burdens. Is that what you think you are? A burden? Olivia moved closer, her fear giving way to a certainty she hadn't felt in months. Henry Hayes, you are the furthest thing from a burden I could imagine. His expression softened. Even so, there's a lot we need to discuss before anything else happens between us. Olivia nodded, understanding his caution. The hands will be back soon. Day after tomorrow, most likely. Then they'll collect their pay and be on their way until spring. Henry took a sip of coffee. Once they're gone, we need to figure out what to do about your situation with Blackwood. The reminder of her legal troubles dampened Olivia's spirits, but she knew Henry was right. They couldn't build anything together with that shadow hanging over her. For the next 2 days, they fell back into their routine, but with a new awareness of each other that charged even the most mundane interactions with significance. Their hands would brush as they passed items at the table, Their eyes would meet across a room, conveying feelings that neither was quite ready to put into words. When the hands returned, dusty and tired but in good spirits after the successful drive, Olivia prepared a celebratory meal. There was a festive atmosphere as the cowboys recounted tales from the trail, each story growing more outlandish as the evening progressed. The next morning, Henry settled accounts with each man. Some would return in the spring for the next roundup, while others would drift on to other ranches or towns. By midday, the bunkhouse was empty, and the Double H was quiet once more. That evening, after the chores were done and dinner was cleared away, Henry and Olivia sat before the fire. The autumn nights had grown cool enough to make the warmth welcome, and the dancing flames created a cozy intimacy in the room. "I've been thinking about your situation," Henry began, his expression serious. "I believe I have a solution, but I need to know if you trust me." "With my life," Olivia said without hesitation. "What do you have in mind? We need to clear your name, which means confronting Blackwood's lies directly." Henry leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I want to take you to Tucson to speak with Marshal Wilson. He's a fair man, and if we present your side of the story along with whatever evidence we can gather, he might believe you." Olivia's stomach tightened with anxiety. "What evidence do I have? It's my word against Thomas's, and he's convinced everyone I was his accomplice." "Not everyone," Henry countered. "Did you keep any correspondence from Blackwood, letters that might show his true character or intentions?" Olivia thought for a moment. "I have the letters he sent while I was waiting in Wilcox. They don't prove my innocence, but they do show he was stringing me along with promises of arrival dates he never kept." "That's a start. What about the deed to the non-existent mine? Do you still have it?" "Yes, in my reticule. Fat lot of good it does me." "Actually, it might help more than you think. If we can prove the deed is fraudulent and that Blackwood used the same document to swindle others, it supports your claim that you were a victim, not an accomplice." Henry's eyes were alight with determination. "And there's one more thing in your favor me." Olivia tilted her head questioningly. "I'll testify to finding you walking out of Wilcox with nothing but the clothes on your back. If you were Blackwood's accomplice with half the stolen money, why would you be leaving on foot? Where were your supplies, your horse, your obviously stolen funds?" For the first time since learning of Thomas's treachery, Olivia felt a flicker of hope regarding her legal situation. "Do you really think the marshal will listen?" "I think it's worth trying," Henry said. "The alternative is living in fear of discovery, always looking over your shoulder. That's no way to build a life. Build a life." The phrase hung in the air between them, laden with implications neither had directly addressed. "And if it works," Olivia asked softly, "if my name is cleared?" Henry's gaze held her steadily. "Then you'd be free to do whatever you choose. Go wherever you want. Stay wherever or with whomever makes you happy." The fire crackled in the silence that followed, shadows dancing across their faces as each considered the weight of his words. "I already know what would make me happy, Henry." Olivia's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried clearly in the quiet room. He reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his. "I've known since the day you turned my kitchen into something that actually resembles a home." Olivia laughed softly, tears of relief and happiness pricking at her eyes. "It takes more than clean curtains and regular meals to make a home." "Yes," he agreed, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "It takes someone worth coming home to." His words warmed her more than the fire ever could. For so long, she'd been nobody's priority, not after her father's death, certainly not to Thomas, who had seen her only as a means to an end. But to Henry, she mattered. She was someone worth fighting for, someone worth building a life with. "When do we leave for Tucson?" she asked, her decision made. "Tomorrow, if you're ready. The sooner we resolve this, the sooner we can move forward." He hesitated, then added, "Together, if that's what you want." Olivia moved from her chair to kneel before him, taking both his hands in hers. "It's what I want more than anything. But Henry, you need to understand, even if my name is cleared, I have nothing. No money, no property, nothing to contribute to this partnership. You have everything that matters," he said firmly. "Courage, integrity, and a heart that somehow hasn't been hardened by betrayal. The rest is just details." She raised a hand to his cheek, marveling at the rough texture of his stubble against her palm. "How did I get so lucky, walking away from Wilcox that day?" "I think we both got lucky," he murmured, leaning forward to close the distance between them. This kiss was different from their first, unhurried and deeper, a promise rather than a declaration. Olivia felt herself melting into him, all her fears temporarily banished by the certainty of his arms around her and his heart beating against hers. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Henry rested his forehead against hers. "We should probably get some rest." "It's a long ride to Tucson." Olivia nodded, though reluctant to break the connection between them. "You're right, tomorrow will be challenging." He helped her to her feet, his hands lingering on her waist. "Whatever happens, Olivia, we'll face it together, I promise you that." As she lay in bed that night, Olivia felt a curious mixture of anxiety and peace. The prospect of confronting Thomas and possibly facing arrest was terrifying. But the knowledge that she wouldn't face it alone gave her a strength she hadn't known she possessed. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Olivia Zephyr fell asleep with hope in her heart and a future uncertain but full of possibility stretching before her. The journey to Tucson took 2 days, with an overnight stay at a small way station along the stage route. Henry had decided it would be safer to travel by wagon rather than horseback, as it would allow Olivia to maintain a lower profile and provide more comfort for the journey. They set out early, the wagon loaded with supplies and Olivia's meager possessions. As they left the boundaries of the Double H behind, Olivia felt a momentary panic. The ranch had become her sanctuary, and leaving its safety for the uncertainties ahead required more courage than she thought she possessed. Having second thoughts, Henry asked quietly, noting her tense posture beside him on the wagon seat. "No," she said firmly, though her hands clutched her reticule with white-knuckled intensity. "Just first, second, and third fears." His smile was gentle. "Understandable, but remember, the truth is on your side. And so am I." The way station where they spent the night was a simple adobe structure with a few small rooms for travelers, a common dining area, and corrals for horses and livestock. The elderly couple who ran it seemed uninterested in their guests beyond ensuring they were fed and comfortable, which suited Olivia perfectly. As they continued their journey the next morning, the landscape gradually changed, the terrain becoming more varied as they approached the larger settlement of Tucson. By mid-afternoon, they could see the town in the distance, its buildings shimmering in the heat. "We'll go directly to the marshal's office," Henry said as they drove into Tucson. "Better to face this head-on rather than wait and risk someone recognizing you." Olivia nodded, her throat too dry with nervousness to form words. She'd spent the journey rehearsing what she would say, how she would present her case, but now that the moment was upon her, all her carefully prepared arguments seemed inadequate. The marshal's office was located on the main street, a solid brick building with barred windows and the U.S. flag hanging limply in the still air. Henry helped Olivia down from the wagon, his hand lingering supportively at the small of her back. "Ready?" he asked quietly. She took a deep breath. "As I'll ever be." Inside, they found Deputy Marshal Wilson seated at a desk, reviewing wanted posters. He looked up at their entrance, recognition dawning as he saw Henry. "Mr. Hayes, didn't expect to see you in town." His gaze shifted to Olivia, curious but not suspicious. "Madam." "Marshal," Henry began, removing his hat, "we need to discuss the Thomas Blackwood case with you." Wilson's expression sharpened. "What's your interest in Blackwood?" Henry gestured to Olivia. "This is Olivia Zephyr. She was Blackwood's fiancée and one of his victims. She's been staying at my ranch since I found her walking out of Wilcox with nothing but the clothes on her back." The marshal's hand moved instinctively toward his gun. "Miss Zephyr is wanted for questioning as Blackwood's accomplice." "I know," Olivia said, stepping forward despite her fear. "That's why I'm here, to clear my name and tell you the truth about Thomas." Wilson studied her for a long moment, his weathered face unreadable. "You're turning yourself in. She's making a statement," Henry corrected firmly. "There's a difference." "I suppose there is." The marshal gestured to chairs across from his desk. "Have a seat. This might take a while." For the next 2 hours, Olivia told her story how she'd met Thomas in Boston, his courtship and proposal, his persuasive arguments about investing in Western mining operations, and finally, her discovery of his deception. She produced the letters he'd sent while she was waiting in Wilcox and the fraudulent mine deed. "I never saw any of the money after I gave it to Thomas," she concluded. "I never participated in his schemes or knew what he was doing. When I realized I'd been duped, I tried to go to the sheriff in Wilcox, but it was clear he already believed I was involved. I panicked and ran." Marshal Wilson had listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. Now he leaned back in his chair, considering. "It's a compelling story, Miss Zephyr, but Blackwood claims you were in on the scheme from the beginning. Says you helped him gain the trust of his marks and knew exactly what was happening." "He's lying," Olivia said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Why would I leave on foot with nothing if I had half the money, as he claims? Where would I have hidden it? Mr. Hayes found me miles from town with nothing but a dress and the worthless deed." Wilson turned to Henry. "That true? You found her on the road out of Wilcox?" Henry nodded. "Just as she says. No horse, no supplies, not even a canteen. I offered her mine because she looked ready to collapse from thirst." The marshal drummed his fingers on the desk, thinking. "Blackwood's story does have some holes. We never found the rest of the money he claims you took. And it doesn't make much sense for an accomplice to flee on foot with no provisions." Hope flickered in Olivia's chest. "I can provide references from Boston who will attest to my character before I met Thomas. And the banker's wife in Wilcox, Mrs. Thornton, can confirm that I was waiting for Thomas's arrival for months." "That won't be necessary just yet," Wilson said. "I'd like you to confront Blackwood directly. Let's see how his story holds up when you're both in the same room." Olivia's stomach clenched with anxiety, but she nodded. "I'm willing to face him." "Good." The marshal stood. "He's being held in the county jail. We'll go now if you're ready." The county jail was a grim stone building behind the courthouse. As they were led inside by Marshal Wilson, Olivia fought to control her trembling. The thought of seeing Thomas again, the man who had professed to love her, while systematically ruining her life, filled her with a mixture of dread and anger. Henry must have sensed her distress, for he placed a reassuring hand at her elbow. "I'll be right beside you," he murmured. The cell area was dim and cool, with barred compartments lining both sides of a central corridor. In the third cell on the right, a man sat on a narrow cot, his once fine clothes now wrinkled and soiled. Thomas Blackwood looked up at their approach, his handsome features arranging themselves into an expression of surprise that Olivia now recognized as calculated. "Olivia, darling," he said, rising to his feet. "I've been so worried about you. Where have you been?" The false concern in his voice made her skin crawl. "Drop the act, Thomas. It's over." His expression hardened slightly, but he maintained his performance for the marshal's benefit. "I don't know what you mean. I've been telling everyone how concerned I am for your safety." "After you disappeared with what, Thomas?" Olivia interrupted, finding strength in her anger. "With the money you claim I took. The money that never existed because you spent all of it my inheritance on your gambling and schemes." Blackwood's charm slipped further. "Now, Olivia, you know that's not true. We were partners. I agreed to marry you. I agreed to invest in what I thought was a legitimate business opportunity. I never agreed to help you defraud innocent people." Olivia stepped closer to the bars, beyond caring that tears of fury were streaming down her face. "You stole everything from me, not just my money, but my reputation, my future, my ability to trust." Thomas looked to Marshal Wilson. "She's obviously upset and confused." "We had an arrangement you conveniently can't prove," the marshal observed, "just as you conveniently can't explain where the missing money is." "She has it," Thomas insisted, his charm giving way entirely to desperation. "She must have hidden it somewhere. Check her things. Check wherever she's been staying." Henry stepped forward. "Miss Zephyr has been at my ranch for nearly 2 months. She arrived with nothing but her dress and that worthless deed you gave her. I can attest to that under oath." Thomas's eyes narrowed as he took in Henry's protective stance beside Olivia. "I see how it is. You found yourself a new protector, haven't you, Olivia? How convenient. Did you tell him about the child you lost in Boston? Or about your father's gambling debts that you were so desperate to hide?" Olivia gasped at the vicious lies, but before she could respond, the door at the end of the corridor opened and another figure entered. Mrs. Margaret Thornton. "Marshal, I came as soon as I received your telegram," she said, approaching their group. Her eyes widened slightly at the sight of Olivia. "Mrs. Hayes, or should I say Miss Zephyr, Mrs. Thornton," Olivia acknowledged, bracing herself for condemnation. To her surprise, the banker's wife turned to Marshal Wilson with purpose. "I understand you're trying to determine Miss Zephyr's role in Mr. Blackwood's schemes." "I believe I can be of assistance." "You know this woman?" the marshal asked. "I do. I met her at Henry Hayes's ranch recently, where she was introduced as his widowed cousin. But more importantly, I saw her nearly every day for 3 months in Wilcox, where she was waiting for her fiancé to arrive." Margaret fixed Thomas with a cold stare. "A fiancé who sent letter after letter with excuses for his delay, while she lived modestly and properly, never once behaving like a woman with access to ill-gotten gains." Thomas scoffed. "She was playing a part, we both were." "Then she's a remarkably consistent actress," Margaret replied dryly. "I observed Miss Zephyr reading your letters in the hotel dining room, Mr. Blackwood. I saw her genuine distress as weeks turned into months. No one maintains such a charade in private moments when they think no one is watching." Marshal Wilson looked from Margaret to Olivia to Thomas, his expression thoughtful. "Mrs. Thornton, would you be willing to provide a sworn statement to that effect?" "Certainly. And I can provide other witnesses from Wilcox who will confirm Miss Zephyr's behavior during her stay. She attended church regularly, participated in charity work, and lived frugally, hardly the actions of a woman with a fortune hidden away." Thomas gripped the bars of his cell, his knuckles white. "You can't possibly believe her over me. Olivia and I planned this together. She knows where the money is." "The only thing I know," Olivia said evenly, "is that you're a liar and a thief, Thomas. You took everything I had and tried to destroy what little I had left my good name. But you won't succeed." She turned to Marshal Wilson. I've told you everything I know. I've provided what evidence I have. I'm willing to testify against Thomas at his trial, but I am not his accomplice and I don't have any stolen money." The marshal studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "I believe you, Miss Zephyr. Your story makes more sense than his, and Mrs. Thornton's testimony supports your version of events." He glanced at Thomas. "Blackwood's been inconsistent from the start. First claiming you had half the money, then all of it, then claiming it was hidden somewhere. The amounts keep changing too." Relief washed over Olivia in a dizzying wave. She felt Henry's hand at her elbow again, steadying her. "Does this mean she's free to go?" Henry asked. "For now," Marshal Wilson confirmed. "I'll need a statement from her, and she should remain available if further questions arise. But I no longer consider Miss Zephyr a suspect in this case." Thomas lunged against the bars. "You're making a mistake. She's fooling all of you, just like she fooled me into thinking she was a proper Boston lady instead of a—" "That's enough," the marshal cut him off sharply. "One more word and I'll add slander to your charges." As they left the jail, Olivia felt as though a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The bright Arizona sunshine seemed more intense after the dimness of the jail, and she blinked against its glare. "Thank you, Margaret," she said, turning to the banker's wife. "I don't know how to repay your kindness." Margaret smiled warmly. "There's nothing to repay. I simply told the truth as I observed it." She glanced between Olivia and Henry with knowing eyes. "Besides, I think it's important that young people with genuine feelings for each other aren't kept apart by lies and misunderstandings." Henry's hand found Olivia's, his fingers intertwining with hers. "Mrs. Thornton has always been perceptive," he said, a slight flush coloring his face. "Indeed." Margaret's smile widened. "Now, I suggest you both stay in Tucson tonight. The stage back to Wilcox doesn't leave until morning, and you look exhausted, my dear." After Margaret departed, and they had provided their formal statements to Marshal Wilson, Henry and Olivia found a small, respectable hotel near the main plaza. Henry reserved 2 adjoining rooms, insisting on propriety despite the new understanding between them. "I want to do this right," he explained as they stood in the corridor between their rooms. "You deserve that much after everything." Olivia's heart swelled with affection for this honorable man. "Thank you for everything. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't offered me that canteen on the road that day. I think fate might have found another way to bring us together," he said softly, "but I'm glad it happened as it did." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we head home." Home. The word resonated within Olivia with a depth of meaning she hadn't anticipated. Home wasn't Boston anymore with its social constraints and memories of her father. It wasn't Wilcox, where she'd waited in vain for a future that was never real. Home was a modest ranch in the Arizona desert, with a man whose quiet strength and unwavering integrity had healed her wounded heart. "Yes," she said, smiling up at him. "Let's go home." The return journey to the Double H seemed shorter than the trip to Tucson, perhaps because Olivia's spirits were lighter without the burden of fear that had accompanied her before. She and Henry spoke of practical matters, the winter preparations needed for the ranch, the repairs to be done before the spring roundup, but beneath the ordinary conversation ran a current of anticipation for the future they would build together. As they approached the familiar rise that marked the boundary of the ranch, Olivia felt a surge of emotion. 2 months ago, she had arrived here as a desperate stranger with nowhere else to turn. Now she was returning as a woman with a place in the world and someone who valued her for herself, not for what she could provide. "It looks good, doesn't it?" Henry said, following her gaze to the ranch buildings nestled in the valley below. "Like it's been waiting for us." "It does," she agreed, her voice soft with wonder at how much her life had changed. "I never expected to find a home here." Henry reined the wagon to a halt at the top of the rise, turning to face her fully. "Olivia, before we go any further, there's something I need to ask you." Her heart quickened at the serious tone in his voice. "Yes, these past 2 months, having you at the Double H, it's made me realize what was missing in my life." He took her hands in his eyes never leaving hers. "I was existing before, not living. Just getting through each day, each season, without any real purpose beyond keeping the ranch going." Olivia squeezed his hands encouragingly, emotion making it difficult to speak. "I know it's soon," Henry continued. "I know you're just beginning to find your footing again after everything that's happened, but I can't imagine the ranch or my life without you in it." He took a deep breath. "Olivia Zephyr, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not right away if you're not ready, but someday." Joy bubbled up within her, spilling over in a laugh that was half sob. "Henry Hayes, are you proposing to me on a dusty wagon seat in the middle of nowhere?" A smile tugged at his lips. "I suppose I am. Is that a problem?" "Not at all." She leaned forward, cupping his face in her hands. "It's perfect. And yes, I will marry you. Not someday, as soon as you like." His answering smile was brighter than the Arizona sun as he pulled her into his arms, sealing their promise with a kiss that spoke of all the tomorrows waiting for them. Rusty's enthusiastic barking greeted them as they drove into the ranch yard, the dog racing circles around the wagon in his excitement. Henry helped Olivia down, and for a moment they simply stood together, taking in the sight of the place that would be their home, not just a house or a ranch, but the center of the life they would build together. Their wedding took place a month later in Wilcox, with Margaret Thornton organizing the modest ceremony and reception at the town's small church. Silas stood as Henry's best man, while Margaret served as Olivia's matron of honor. The celebration that followed was joyful but simple, reflecting the couple's preference for genuine connection over elaborate display. When they returned to the Double H that evening, Olivia as Mrs. Hayes in truth rather than fiction, they found the house transformed by Margaret's discreet arrangements, fresh linens on the bed, flowers on the table, and a cake waiting in the kitchen. "Welcome home, Mrs. Hayes," Henry said as he carried her over the threshold, an old-fashioned gesture that made her laugh with delight. "It's good to be home, Mr. Hayes," she replied, kissing him as he set her gently on her feet. "For good this time." As winter settled over the Arizona territory, bringing cool days and cold nights that made the warmth of their shared bed all the more precious, Olivia and Henry established the rhythms of their married life. They worked together during the day, Henry tending to the ranch, Olivia managing the household and learning to ride so she could occasionally accompany him on his rounds. In the evenings, they would often read aloud to each other from Henry's collection of books, or simply talk about their days, their dreams, their plans for the future. News reached them in late January that Thomas Blackwood had been sentenced to 15 years in prison for his crimes. The letter from Marshal Wilson also informed them that some of Thomas's victims would receive partial restitution from assets seized during the investigation. Olivia's share, while not equal to what she had lost, would provide a modest nest egg for their future. "What will you do with it?" Henry asked when she showed him the letter. Olivia considered for a moment. "Put it toward our future. Perhaps we could expand the herd, or—" she hesitated, suddenly shy, "perhaps save it for our children's education someday." Henry's expression softened as he pulled her into his arms. "I like that idea very much." Spring brought new growth to the desert landscape and new possibilities to the Double H. With the additional funds from Olivia's restitution, They were able to purchase more breeding stock and hire an extra hand for the busy season. The garden behind the house expanded under Olivia's care, producing vegetables for their table and flowers that brightened the rooms of their home. Margaret Thornton became a regular visitor and a dear friend, often bringing books for Olivia from the Wilcox Literary Society and the latest news from town. Through her, Olivia gradually became part of the community, accepted and respected as Henry's wife rather than whispered about as the woman who had fled Wilcox under suspicious circumstances. By the fall of 1886, as they prepared for their second roundup together, Olivia had news of her own to share. She waited until the evening when they were alone by the fire, Rusty dozing at their feet and the first cool breeze of autumn drifting through the open window. "Henry," she said, setting aside her mending, "I have something to tell you." He looked up from the ledger he'd been reviewing, his expression immediately attentive. "What is it?" "I've been to see the doctor in Wilcox," she began, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "It seems the Double H will have a new resident come spring." For a moment, Henry stared at her uncomprehendingly. Then understanding dawned, joy spreading across his features like sunrise over the desert. "A baby. We're going to have a baby." Olivia nodded, laughing as he swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in his excitement. "Yes, a baby. Our baby. Dr. Miller says sometime in late April or early May." "Olivia," he murmured, setting her gently back on her feet but keeping his arms around her. "You've made me the happiest man in the Arizona Territory, possibly the entire country." "You've made me happier than I ever thought possible," she replied, resting her head against his chest. "When I left Wilcox that day with nothing, I thought my life was over. I never imagined it was just beginning." Henry's hand moved to rest protectively over her still flat stomach. "Our child will never know what it's like to walk away with nothing. I promise you that." "No," Olivia agreed softly. "Our child will always know they're loved. That's the most important thing of all." As they stood together in the home they had built through love and trust, the future stretching before them bright with promise, Olivia thought back to that desperate day on the dusty road out of Wilcox. How close she had come to turning down Henry's offered canteen, to refusing the first kindness that had led to all the others. Sometimes the greatest journeys began with the smallest acts of compassion. A canteen offered to a stranger, a spare room for the night, a chance to start again. And sometimes, if you were very fortunate, they led exactly where you were always meant to be. In the years that followed, the Double H prospered under Henry and Olivia's care. Their son, Edward, was born on a bright May morning in 1887, followed 2 years later by a daughter, Catherine. The children grew strong and healthy in the clear Arizona air, learning the ways of the ranch from their father and the love of books and ideas from their mother. Olivia never returned to Boston, though she maintained correspondence with a few old friends. The East Coast city of her youth seemed a distant dream compared to the vivid reality of her life in the West, a life built on honesty, hard work, and the enduring love of a good man who had once offered a canteen to a desperate woman with nothing. Sometimes, when the spring sun warmed the desert and wildflowers bloomed in unexpected places, Olivia would walk to the rise overlooking the ranch and remember how far she had come. From loss to love, from despair to joy, from a woman walking away with nothing to a woman who had everything that truly mattered. And in those moments of reflection, she would offer a silent prayer of gratitude for second chances, for new beginnings, and for the journey that had led her home.